In each moment, what you call you is created by multiple layers of experience happening at the same time. Even though it feels like one solid experience, it's really a stack of multiple planes of existence. We have biology at the base, we have psychology in the middle, and the symbolic layer, or what you could call the meaning layer, sitting on top. And all of this is happening together all at once. Let me give you an example to show you what I mean. Let's say that you walk into a meeting, and right when you walk in, your boss looks at you in a certain kind of way and starts talking to you with a little more force than usual. You're talking about the project you've been working on, the deadline, stuff like that. Before you pick up a single word, your body reacts first. Your stomach drops, or your shoulders tighten, and your heart rate picks up. That's the biological level. Then the psychological level starts coming online. You start to feel a little anxious, or maybe you feel a little angry. Whatever emotion arises there, your mind starts coming up with thoughts that match the feeling. So depending on your temperament, you might think something like, oh no, like what did I do? You might panic. Or you might think of something else where you might think like, dude, what's your problem? Like, leave me alone. And what happens there is you start to change your tone of voice, like how you speak and how much of yourself that you show based on the thoughts that are arising in that moment. There's your psychology at work. Now, finally, this whole situation I'm describing is following a sort of unwritten set of pre-programmed rules. Like rules about status in a group, for example, like the hierarchy between you and your boss. And that's where the meaning or the symbolic layer starts to become present. Your DNA is basically a record of the decisions that your ancestors made, or you could say the lessons that they learned that worked over time in such a way that they were able to reproduce over and over again for generations. So you could think of the decisions that they made that worked as turning into built-in rules that are built into your genes. So for example, there's an instinctive drive to find your place in a hierarchy and to keep yourself in good standing in a group. And there's a good reason for this if you think about it, because thousands of years ago, if you got kicked out of the group and you were left to fend for yourself in the jungle, say, you probably wouldn't survive. So our ancestors that followed the best rules for optimal reproduction ended up reproducing. And that means whatever rules they lived by worked, and that's why they were passed on. So we're built to notice these deep, invisible rules whenever they're challenged. And that's why meaning exists in the first place. It's the way that we make sense of the invisible rule book that we have encoded in our genes. So our conscious experience seems to be made of these three different planes: the biological plane, the psychological plane, and the symbolic plane. And what I'm going to do for the next few videos is I'm going to break down each layer, each plane of experience down in a lot more detail. So for today, let's start with the base, which is the biological plane. The biological plane is made up of three different levels, three different kinds of intelligence that you would call pre-reflective awareness. Now, whenever I say the word awareness, I'm talking about the fundamental ability to detect something and to respond to it, even if it's not thinking about it in the same kind of commonly understood kind of way. It's the built-in sensitivity that some kind of system can use to register information and to organize itself. So the three different levels of the biological plane are molecular awareness, cellular awareness, and instinctive awareness. So it's sort of like a Russian doll setup. There's the biological, psychological, and symbolic, and within each one of those, there's these different levels. So that's where we're starting at. So let's get started at the bottom there, at the bottom of biology, at the basement, which is molecular awareness. So whenever I say molecule, you're probably thinking about physics, right? Like dead matter, billiard balls hitting into each other. But in biology, molecules have a kind of cognition, you could say, based on geometry. It's about how they fit together. So here's what I mean. Once or twice a year, I get a cold, like a stuffy nose, a little dry throat, just a common cold. A common cold is usually caused by a virus. So when a virus shows up, your immune system makes these tiny defender proteins called antibodies. And their job is to latch on to the virus and sort of tag it so the rest of the immune system can find it and deal with it. So an antibody is a molecule. It's a protein that's folded into a very specific kind of shape, and it has a little surface that can grab onto something, sort of like a key looking for the right lock. So a virus is covered in its own shapes too. It's like little patterns and bumps on the outside. When a virus enters your body, you basically have a theoretical 1 trillion different variations, different antibody keys that can be tested against the lock of the virus. And most of those shapes don't fit, so they just brush past and drift away. But eventually, one antibody hits the right spot and it fits well enough to stick. Fundamentally, that's what molecular awareness is. It's the intelligence through fit. The chemistry does what it was shaped to do. Now take that idea and let's zoom it out and stretch it across deep time. So your genes are made of molecules. They're a chemical code that gets copied from one generation to the next. And every time that code gets copied, small variations can kind of sneak in. And so what that means is across generations, tiny DNA changes slip in, and sometimes they change the shape of a protein. And those new shapes then get tested for fit in the environment. So maybe an immune protein grabs a virus faster, so the infection stays smaller. Or maybe a clotting protein works quicker, so it stops bleeding sooner. Whatever it is, those small improvements add up. And when a change helps a living body work better out in the real world conditions, it's more likely to get passed on. And when it makes things work worse, it tends to fade out over time. At the molecular level, everything happens through these individual interactions, like one molecule bumping into another one thing triggering the next. But whenever you zoom out, you start noticing that all these little interactions are happening inside these little containers. And those containers are cells. So that brings us to the next level of the biological plane, which is called cellular awareness. So a cell has a boundary. It has an inside and it has an outside. It has a membrane that decides what gets in and what stays out. And that boundary is what lets the chemistry at the molecular level become organized. So it keeps all those reactions close together. It keeps the right ingredients in the same place. And ultimately, it lets the cell respond as a unit. Cells use molecules to communicate. So just like I'm using these words to communicate to you, cells use molecules to communicate to each other. So they release these little chemical messages into the space around them, and other cells pick up on those messages with little receptors on their surface. So whenever the right chemical shows up, the right receptor shifts, and the cell adjusts what it's doing based on what it just sensed. So maybe a way that you could think about this is like perfume in a room. So like one spray is sort of faint enough that you might not even notice it, but a few more sprays that get sprayed into the room and it starts to spread. Then at a certain point, the whole room smells like it, and you don't really wonder if someone sprayed something because it's so obvious. And so then you just react to however you react to that kind of smell. This reminds me of something that happened to me years ago, which is one of those mistakes that you only make one time. So I just moved into my first apartment and I was making mac and cheese. And I turned on the stove to boil some water, and then I poured the pasta in. And I guess somehow I bumped the back burner on without noticing. And so I set the empty box down there in the back with part of it on the top burner right there. And so I walked out into the living room for a minute just to go watch TV while I was waiting for it to cook. So all of a sudden, I started to smell this sort of faint smell, and I wasn't even sure what it was, In a few seconds, it got stronger, and suddenly it was like obvious that something was burning. When I went back in the kitchen, the box was starting to burn, so I took it off and put it in the sink, and it was all good. But the main idea that I'm trying to communicate there is that pattern is basically what cells are doing too, just in their own language. So in my story, the burning box put the chemicals into the air, and then the smell spread through the apartment, and it kept building. And my nose picked it up, and the moment that it got strong enough, my whole system switched from normal to action. And so that's when I went and dealt with it. Cells do the same kind of thing. They release chemical messages into the space around them, and those messages build up in that local area. Then receptors on the cell surface pick them up, and once the signal's strong enough, the cell changes what it was doing. Now zoom back into your own body. When you get a cut, the area turns into a kind of conversation. The cells near the damage release distress signals, and then other cells respond. So that means that platelets gather, clotting starts happening, immune cells start to arrive, tissue repair starts. The whole process holds together like this because the cells are all sharing these messages in real time, and they keep adjusting based on what they sense from each other. And importantly, no single cell understands the whole plan. It's like they're not thinking what they're doing, obviously. The order comes from the coordination, from the communication. So cellular awareness is the body's fundamental communication layer. It's how the body holds itself together moment by moment through this constant cellular signaling. It's kind of crazy. We tend to think of ourselves as these, like as a single solid unit, as a single me. But biologically, you're like a community of like 30 trillion cells that are adjusting and signaling every single second. Okay, so if the molecular level is contained inside the cells, then what contains the cellular level? Well, cells bundle into tissues and organs. And when those tissues get wired together by the nervous system, each tissue, each organ, and ultimately the entire body starts acting or reacting according to these built-in patterns. So the cellular level is ultimately contained, you could say, and animated by these built-in patterns, and that's what we call instincts. And so that brings us to the final level of the biological plane, which is instinctive awareness. So to illustrate this, think about your heart. Your heart is made of millions of muscle cells that are all linked together, and they all pass an electrical signal from one cell to the next so that they squeeze in the right order. It's a built-in pattern that runs all day and all night, whether you're paying attention to it or not. So if you stand up real fast, your heart speeds up. If you get startled, it jumps. And you don't have to think about any of that. The heart just senses the changes in your body, and it has a reaction. Of course, this isn't just your heart. Each system in your body does this in its own way. Your lungs adjust to your breathing. Your immune system deals with infections. Your pupils open and close depending on the lighting. They all sense what's happening locally, and they answer with an automatic response. Now, with that in mind, take it one step further. Whenever the nervous system links all of these systems and patterns together, the whole body starts responding as a unit. Something changes out there, and your breath or your heart and your attention, whatever it is, shift before you have time to narrate it. Fundamentally, that's what instinctive awareness is. It's the animal layer of experience that we all have. And you can see this across all mammals. So in 1998, the neuroscientist Panksepp, he wrote this book that mapped out these 7 core instinct systems that run underneath personality and before language. And so he mapped out these 7. It was seeking, fear, rage, lust, care, play, and grief. Now, you don't have to memorize those, but the point here is that the body has these built-in circuits that pull you towards some things, that push you away from others, that drive bonding, that drive things like separation anxiety, and so on. And importantly, these instincts are pre-reflective, meaning they happen before rationalizing and narrating happens. So think back to that mac and cheese story. I set that box down on the burner that I accidentally turned on, and then I left the room. Once the box started heating up, the smoke molecules started riding the air currents, and those molecules made their way all the way across my apartment, and they reached my nose where the sensory cells are built to notice the chemical patterns. Remember, again, in the molecular level, the intelligence is in the fit. So the smoke molecule key matched the receptor lock well enough, and that nerve cell fired. And then the signal moved into the part of my brain that decided something in the environment was dangerous. And that immediate instinct is what panksepp would call fear. It's not thinking like, oh, I'm scared. It's not like that kind of thing. It's not a thought. It's more like an immediate pre-reflective feeling. Something like, hey, pay attention, like fix this now. Then after that, my seeking instinct turns on right behind it. So my attention locks in. It's like, okay, I start scanning. Where's this coming from? It's the kitchen. It's the stove. And then my body's already moving before I finish the thought in my head that something's burning, you know? So on the outside, it looks simple, like smell, and then I act. But underneath it all, it's layers. It's molecules in the air, it's cells detecting, it's nerves carrying a message, and then the instinct steering the body before me as the conscious narrator shows up and explains the situation. So I think that will do for today. So to close this out, let me zoom all the way back and sort of give you this whole map. So I started this video talking about this idea that conscious experience shows up through 3 different layers or 3 different planes. We have the biological plane, the psychological plane, and the symbolic plane. Today, we stayed down in the biological plane. So this is the skeleton of experience. It's the machinery that's already working before you form a thought. So inside that biological plane, we covered these 3 different layers. Molecular awareness, which is like the deepest kind of knowing, where chemistry recognizes chemistry. It's where proteins stick and bind and unlock and trigger reactions based on their shape. That's why an antibody can tag a virus. It's because the intelligence is in the fit, and that same rule is baked into your genes, which have been copied forward for generations. Then after that, we have the cellular awareness level. So cellular awareness is when that molecular intelligence gets organized inside living containers. So a cell has a boundary which draws a line between in here and out there. And that line makes communication possible. So now chemical messages can build up in that space and spread through the tissue and get read by other cells. And once cells can send and receive signals like that, the whole tissue starts acting like one working system. Then that takes us to the final level where instinctive awareness comes in. Instinctive awareness is when organs and muscles get linked together by the nervous system and the whole body begins to respond as one unit. So something changes out there and your whole system wakes up and reacts automatically. This is that animal layer of us that we all have deep down. It's the deep built-in patterns that happen before the conscious narrative. And this is the key thing to notice here. Everything that I've talked about in this video is happening below the psychological plane. So that means that our psychology is built on top of this biological scaffolding. So your mind doesn't just pull thoughts out of thin air. It's working with the signals that are already coming up from the body. So your heart rate, those gut feelings, stuff like hunger and fatigue, that deep biological layer is like the raw data stream, and psychology is what it turns into. So in the next video, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to keep building upward into the psychological plane and look what happens when the mind takes all that raw biological data and turns it into a personal story that starts to feel like me.